When you hear about the M4 Sherman tank, the talk usually zeroes in on its dark reputation during World War II. Thin armor that folded like tinfoil under German high-velocity rounds, a 75mm gun that struggled to dent anything heavier than a Panzer IV, and that gut-wrenching tendency to burst into flames with one solid hit. Crews gave it nicknames that cut deep. Ronson, after the lighter that promised to light first time, every time, or Tommy Cooker, a grim British jab at how a penetrated Sherman could roast its crew in seconds. Picture yourself as a tanker, climbing into that steel box before dawn, knowing every mission might end with you scrambling through a hatch, flames licking at your back, or worse, trapped inside as the world turns to fire. That fear wasn't just about the tank's shortcomings. It came from the brutal reality of a war that pitted undergunned, under-armored Shermans against German behemoths they were never meant to fight. The simplified story, the one you hear in casual chats or see in old war flicks, paints the Sherman as a death trap. But the real terror ran deeper, woven into the mismatch between the tank's design and the hellish battles its crews endured. There were three core reasons why M4 Sherman crews dreaded every mission in World War II, turning each rollout into a roll of the dice with death itself. To grasp why, we need to start at the root, what the Sherman was built for in the first place. The M4 Sherman wasn't crafted to slug it out with Tigers or Panthers in some cinematic tank duel. Its job was infantry support, plain and simple. Back in the late 1930s, the US Army was still figuring out what tanks were supposed to do. Their early designs, like the M2A1, were little more than armored boxes studded with machine guns, up to 9 in some cases, meant to spray fire and help infantry break through entrenched lines. That mindset came from World War I's trench warfare, where tanks were mobile battering rams, not tank killers. But then, 1939 hit, and Germany's blitzkrieg steamrolled Poland, followed by France in 1940. The Nazis had mastered combined arms, tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support, moving like a single, unstoppable fist. The U.S. Army's ideas, like the oddball tank destroyer doctrine that leaned on specialized vehicles to hunt enemy armor, collapsed under the weight of this new reality. America needed a tank that could do a bit of everything, and fast. The M3 Lee was the first attempt, rushed into service in 1941. It was a clunker. Its main 75mm gun was mounted in the hull, not a turret, making it a pain to aim, and its tall silhouette was a magnet for enemy fire. But the Lee's chassis was reliable, already in production, and good enough to build on. So, instead of starting from scratch, the U.S. turned that chassis into the M4 Sherman, named by the British after Civil War General William Tecumseh Sherman when they got early models through Lend-Lease. Rolling out in 1942, the Sherman looked promising. A 75mm M3 gun in a fully rotating turret, armor ranging from 50mm to about 90mm on sloped surfaces, and a top speed of 25 to 30 miles per hour on decent terrain. It came with various engines. The M4A1 had a radial aircraft engine, while the M4A3 got a rugged Ford V8. For 1942, it was a solid machine, designed to support infantry, blast bunkers, and keep up with fast-moving campaigns across North Africa, Europe, and the Pacific. But here's where the fear started to creep in. And it's the first major reason Sherman crews dreaded every mission. The industrial juggernaut that churned out Shermans by the tens of thousands, flooding battlefields with tanks that were reliable but outclassed. President Roosevelt pushed for massive production, 45,000 tanks a year at one point, to overwhelm the Axis with sheer numbers. By 1945, the U.S. had built nearly 50,000 Shermans across 5 main variants: M4, M4A1, M4A2, M4A3, M4A4, and dozens of sub-variants, each tweaked for specific roles or theaters. The genius was standardization. Engines, transmissions, tracks, even smaller components were interchangeable across models. A busted M4A1 could be patched with parts from an M4A3 in hours. Mechanics could cannibalize 2 wrecked tanks to get 3 back in the fight, often overnight. The same chassis powered tank destroyers like the M10 Wolverine and M36 Jackson, plus self-propelled guns like the M7 Priest. This logistical brilliance meant Shermans were always available, even after devastating losses. Contrast that with Germany's approach. Their tanks were masterpieces of engineering. The Tiger Y with its fearsome 88mm KWK-36 gun, the Panther with its sloped armor, and high-velocity 75mm KWK-42. But they were over-engineered to the point of insanity. Hitler's demands for constant upgrades caused production delays and parts shortages. A Panther's final drive might fail after 100 miles. Replacing it took days and rare spares. Tigers were even worse. Only 1,300 built, each one practically a bespoke project. Germany produced about 6,000 Panthers and 8,000 Panzer R4s, but keeping them running was a nightmare. Spare parts were scarce, and repairs often required factory-level work. Meanwhile, the U.S. flooded the fronts with Shermans, overwhelming through numbers and reliability. But for the crews, that meant more missions, more exposure to danger, and more encounters with enemies that could kill you from beyond your gun's range. In Normandy's bocage, those thick maze-like hedgerows, Shermans were sitting ducks. A hidden PaK-40 anti-tank gun could punch through their frontal armor at 1,000 yards. Crews knew the stats. In June 1944, Allied forces lost over 600 Shermans in Normandy, many to ambushes or long-range fire. Imagine you're a driver in an M4A3, rumbling through France in July 1944. The engine's humming, but the cramped turret smells of sweat and oil. Your commander's barking orders over the intercom, his periscope barely able to spot threats through the dust and foliage. Every hedgerow could hide a Panther, a Tiger, or a towed 88mm gun. You're gripping the controls, knowing your floor armor, barely an inch thick, won't stop a mine or a well-placed shell. If a round hits, the ammo racks along the hull sides could ignite, turning your tank into a fireball. Early Shermans were notorious for this. A single penetration could spark the propellant, and the whole tank would brew up, as the British called it, like a teapot on boil. Survivors shared horror stories around campfires. Saw a buddy's tank go up. Flames shot out the hatch. Didn't even have time to scream. That image haunted every mission, every mile. But before we dive into the combat nightmares, let's break down what made a tank truly terrifying for its crew, because this sets up the second reason for their fear: the Sherman's design flaws in a war that demanded far more than it could deliver. A tank lives or dies by 4 traits: firepower, protection, mobility, and reliability. The Sherman excelled in mobility and reliability. It could navigate muddy fields, desert sands, or Italian hills at decent speed, and its standardized parts kept it running when others broke down. But firepower and protection? That's where it fell apart, and crews felt it every time they rolled out. Compared to the Panzer IV, its closest rival, the Sherman was competitive in 1942. Both tanks evolved, with the Panzer IV getting a long-barreled 75mm KWK-40 by 1943, capable of piercing Shermans at 1,000 yards. The Sherman's 75mm M3, meanwhile, was a medium-velocity gun, great for high-explosive HE shells against infantry, bunkers, or soft targets, but nearly useless against heavy armor beyond 500 yards. Against a Tiger's 100 to 120mm frontal armor, or a Panther's sloped 80mm, it was like tossing pebbles. The armor situation was just as grim. The Sherman's sloped frontal plate offered about 90mm of effective protection in early models, decent against 1942 threats like the Panzer III or early Panzer IVs. But by 1944, German guns like the Tiger's 88mm KWK-36 or the Panther's 75mm KWK-42 could punch through at over a kilometer. Crews knew the odds. One hit, and you were done. That fear was visceral, not theoretical. In the Battle of Ericourt in September 1944, U.S. Shermans clashed with German Panthers. American numbers, air support, and clever tactics won the day, but individual crews paid a brutal price. One gunner recalled, "We hit a Panther 5 times with 75mm AP rounds. Didn't even dent it. Then it fired once, and our lead tank was gone. Flames everywhere." Losses like that were common. The U.S. lost over 4,700 Shermans in the European theater alone, many to superior firepower. Each mission was a gamble, knowing your armor might not hold and your gun might not kill. Then there was the fire issue, the stuff of nightmares that fueled crew dread. Early Shermans stored 75 millimeters, shells in unprotected racks along the hull sides, where a single penetration could spark a catastrophic chain reaction. The propellant burned fast and hot, turning the tank into an inferno. British crews reported that 80% of penetrated Shermans brewed up in 1943, earning those grim nicknames. The U.S. responded with wet stowage by mid-1944, moving ammo to armored bins on the floor, surrounded by water glycol jackets that doused flames on impact. This cut burn rates to about 15%, and wider, spring-loaded hatches boosted crew survival. Statistically, only 1.3 men died per destroyed Sherman, better than most tanks of the era. But for those inside, numbers meant nothing. You'd hear the high-pitched whine of an incoming shell, brace against the hull, and pray it missed. If it hit, you had seconds to escape before the heat consumed you. Survivors carried scars, physical burns, psychological trauma, the acrid smell of charred metal and flesh seared into their minds. One tanker wrote, "Every time we rolled out, I saw my crew's faces, tight, pale, knowing one hit could be it." Now, let's dive into the combat itself, where the third reason for fear took shape. The Sherman's tactical disadvantages in real-world fights, where its strengths were often outmatched by German superiority. The Sherman had three features that gave it an edge in theory, but in practice they couldn't always overcome the odds. First was turret traverse speed. The Sherman's electric-hydraulic system could spin the turret 360 degrees in about 15 to 17 seconds, faster than a Panzer's 26 seconds, or a Tiger's sluggish 60th. In close quarters, like Normandy's bocage, where hedgerows turned battles into knife fights, that speed could let you aim first. But German Zeiss optics were leagues ahead, offering crystal-clear views that let their gunners spot and range targets faster. You might swing your turret quick, but they'd already have you in their sights, their crosshairs steady while your periscope bounced. Second was rate of fire. A well-drilled Sherman crew could pump out 15 to 20 rounds per minute, thanks to the 75 mm short barrel and a trained loader. Tigers managed 4 to 6, Panthers maybe 8 to 10. In a chaotic brawl, that meant Shermans could overwhelm with volume, especially using HE or white phosphorus WP rounds. WP, nicknamed Willie Pete, was a dirty trick. Its choking smoke blinded German optics, burned exposed crewmen, or forced them to bail, thinking their tank was ablaze. In one Normandy skirmish, a WP hit made a Panther crew abandon their tank, convinced it was burning. But volume didn't always cut it. Against heavy armor, you needed armor-piercing, AP rounds, and the 75 mm low velocity meant they bounced off Tigers or Panthers at anything over 500 yards. Crews had to close in, exposing themselves to get a side shot, suicidal against a Tiger's 88 mm, which could kill from 2,000 yards. In those moments, you weren't just fighting the enemy, you were fighting your tank's limits. Third was the gyro stabilizer, a vertical gyro that kept the gun roughly on target while moving. It wasn't accurate enough to fire on the go, but it let crews stop and aim faster, sometimes shaving seconds in a duel. Some crews swore by it, saying it gave them an edge in snapshots. Others, frustrated by its finicky maintenance, turned it off. In theory, these advantages, fast turret, high rate of fire, quick aiming, made the Sherman deadly in close fights. But reality was brutal. German tanks had superior guns, thicker armor, and by 1944, their crews were often battle-hardened veterans, while many U.S. tankers were green replacements fresh from stateside training. U.S. doctrine called for Shermans to support infantry, exploiting breakthroughs after artillery or air support softened the enemy. But battles didn't follow doctrine. Tank-on-tank fights were common, and Shermans were outgunned. You'd advance, spot a Panther's silhouette, but then its 75 mm KWK-42 would fire, and your tank would erupt before you could reply. That fear of being outclassed and outranged hung over every mission. Subscribe if you like the video. It's stories like these that keep history alive, and we've got more coming. Let's zoom into the campaigns where this fear burned brightest, starting with D-Day, June 6, 1944. On Omaha Beach, D.D. Shermans, fitted with flotation skirts for amphibious landings, launched from landing craft into churning seas. Rough waves sank dozens before they reached shore, drowning crews or leaving them stranded under machine gun fire. Those that made it hit the beach facing coastal 88mm guns that ripped through their armor like paper. Survivors described the chaos, tanks brewing up on the sand, men burning or gunned down as they bailed out through hatches. One tanker recalled, "We hit the beach, and an 88 took out our lead tank. Flames shot 20 feet high. We just kept moving, praying we weren't next." The breakout in Operation Cobra, late July 1944, was no reprieve. Sherman spearheaded the push, but German counterattacks with Panthers and Panzerführers shredded them. In one clash, the 3rd Armored Division lost 36 tanks in a day, crews overwhelmed by long-range fire. A gunner wrote, "We fired everything. HE, WP, AP. Nothing worked. Their shells came through our front plate like it was cardboard." The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 turned fear into a frozen nightmare. In sub-zero fog, German Panthers and Tigers prowled, their wide tracks gripping snow while Sherman's narrow ones spun uselessly. At Bastogne, surrounded U.S. forces relied on Shermans to hold defensive lines, but each sortie was a death trap. German 88s, Panzerfausts, and hidden Jagdpanthers, tank destroyers with 88mm guns, lurked in forests. One tank commander recounted, "Lost 2 tanks to a hidden King Tiger. 1 shot, 1 kill. We were sitting ducks in the snow." Belton Cooper's memoir, Death Traps, paints a haunting picture. As a maintenance officer, he recovered hundreds of burned-out Shermans, some with crews charred beyond recognition. The numbers were staggering. 4,700 Shermans lost in Europe, each one a story of terror, loss, and survival against the odds. The Pacific Theater offered no escape from the dread. On islands like Saipan, Guam, or Iwo Jima, Shermans faced Japanese anti-tank teams, hidden guns, and suicide charges. Flamethrower-equipped Zippo Shermans cleared bunkers with streams of fire, but Japanese soldiers with satchel bombs or pole mines could rush tanks, igniting fuel or ammo. On Tarawa in 1943, 47mm guns hidden in caves punched through Sherman hulls at close range. Crews feared the unseen, mines buried in coral, artillery zeroed on narrow paths, or kamikaze-style attacks. One driver recalled, "We'd roll up to a bunker, flame it, but then a guy with a bomb would sprint out. You'd hear the bang and pray it didn't breach the hull." In Italy's rugged mountains, Shermans navigated narrow roads, perfect for ambushes by Stug 3 assault guns or towed 75mm guns. The pattern was relentless: advance, get hit, fight to survive. U.S. doctrine emphasized tanks exploiting gaps after infantry or air support weakened the enemy, but reality forced direct combat, where Shermans bled. Late war upgrades tried to ease the terror, but they often felt like too little, too late. The M4 A376W, introduced in mid-1944, carried a high-velocity 76mm gun that could penetrate Panther sides at decent range, about 800 yards with HVAP rounds. The M4 A3E2 Jumbo added thicker armor, up to 150mm, making it a beast for assault roles. But most crews were stuck with older 75mm models, feeling like relics against 1944 threats. Wet stowage, rolled out in 1944, cut fire risks by moving ammo to armored bins surrounded by water glycol mix, dropping burn rates from 80% to 15%. Wider, spring-loaded hatches helped crews escape faster. But these fixes didn't erase the fear. Crews improvised, welding sandbags, logs, or spare tracks to hulls for extra protection. Desperate hacks born of dread. In Normandy, some fitted rhino attachments, steel prongs to cut through hedgerows, after losing tanks to ambushes. These field mods showed grit, but highlighted the Sherman's core weaknesses. The Tiger Terror amplified everything. Tigers were rare, only 1,300 built, but their legend loomed large. Stories like Michael Whitman's 1944 rampage at Villers-Bocage, where one Tiger wrecked a British column, spread like wildfire among Allied tankers. A single Tiger could halt an advance, its 88mm gun a death sentence from 2,000 yards. Panthers were more common and just as deadly, with sloped armor and a 75mm KWK-42 that outranged Shermans. Even Panzer IVs, upgraded with the KWK-40, could kill from 1,000 yards. Every mission meant scanning horizons for that telltale silhouette, knowing one mistake could end you. Crews shared hushed tales. Heard a Tiger took out 3 Shermans in one shot each. Didn't even see it coming. The fear wasn't just the tank. It was the knowledge that you were outclassed, outgunned, and often outnumbered in experience. Let's dig deeper into specific battles to feel the weight of this fear. In Normandy's bocage, the hedgerows turned every advance into a nightmare. Tanks had to poke through narrow gaps, exposing their thin side armor. German Panzerfaust, or hidden 88s, waited, firing point blank. In one July 1944 engagement near St. Lo, the 2nd Armored Division lost 50 tanks in 2 days, many to ambushes. A loader described the aftermath. Our platoon went in with 5 tanks, came out with 2. The others were burning hulks, crews gone or screaming for medics. In the Hurtgen Forest that fall, Sherman struggled in dense woods, their mobility useless against mines and anti-tank guns. Losses mounted, hundreds of tanks reduced to wrecks, crews decimated. The psychological toll was crushing. Tankers knew replacements would arrive, but many were green, barely trained, thrown into the same meat grinder. The Ardennes offensive, Battle of the Bulge, pushed fear to new depths. In December 1944, German armor surged through snow and fog, catching Allies off guard. Shermans, with their narrow tracks, bogged down in snow, while Panthers and Tigers glided on wider ones. At St. Vith, Shermans held defensive lines, but German 88s and Jagdpanthers picked them off from range. One survivor wrote, "We fired blind into the fog, hoping to hit something. Then a shell came. Boom. My buddy's tank was gone, just smoke and fire." At Bastogne, surrounded GIs relied on Shermans to repel assaults, but each mission risked annihilation. Panzerfausts, wielded by German infantry, could pierce side armor at close range. The cold didn't help, engines strained, and crews shivered in unheated turrets, knowing a single hit could end them. In the Pacific, the fear took a different shape, but was no less real. On Saipan in 1944, Shermans supported Marine advances, but Japanese anti-tank teams hid in jungles, armed with 47mm guns or improvised bombs. On Iwo Jima, Zippo Shermans sprayed flames into caves, but suicide charges, soldiers with pole mines or satchels, could ignite fuel tanks. A driver recalled, "We'd clear a bunker, but then some guy would sprint out with a bomb. You'd hear the explosion and pray it didn't breach." On Okinawa, muddy terrain and hidden artillery turned Shermans into targets. Losses were lower than in Europe, about 700 tanks, but the fear was constant. Every cave, every ridge, could hide a gun or a fanatic ready to die taking you with him. Italy's campaign was another gauntlet. The rugged Apennines and narrow roads favored defenders. German Stugee 3s and towed guns ambushed Shermans in mountain passes. At Anzio in 1944, Shermans supported the breakout but faced dug-in 88s. One tank commander wrote, "We pushed up a road and a hidden gun took out our lead tank. The rest of us scattered, but the shells kept coming." The terrain nullified the Sherman's mobility, and its thin armor left crews exposed. Every mission felt like a trap. Upgrades came, but they couldn't erase the dread. The 76mm M1 gun on later models gave a fighting chance against Panthers, but only at close range with special HVAP rounds, which were scarce. The Jumbo Sherman was tougher, but rare, only 254 built. Most tankers fought in older M4A1s or M4A3s, their 75mm guns outdated by 1944. Crews improvised, welding on extra plates, piling sandbags, or bolting tracks to hulls. In Normandy, rhino prongs cut through hedgerows, but they didn't stop shells. Wet stowage saved lives, but the base design stayed vulnerable. Tankers knew they were in a compromised tank, reliable, numerous, but easy to kill. The psychological weight on M4 Sherman crews was crushing, a relentless shadow that followed them into every mission. It wasn't just the mechanical flaws of their tank, thin armor, underpowered gun, but the constant gnawing awareness that they were rolling into battle against enemies that could end them with a single shot. The Tiger Terror was more than the 1,300 Tiger I tanks Germany fielded. It was a mythos that seeped into every tanker's mind, turning the silhouette of that heavy tank into a specter of doom. With its 88mm KWK-36 gun, a Tiger could punch through a Sherman's frontal armor from over 2,000 yards, often before the American crew even spotted it. One hit, and the tank was a blazing wreck, its crew scrambling for hatches or trapped in a fiery tomb. Stories spread like wildfire. In Normandy, a single Tiger near Caen held up an entire Allied advance, knocking out 6 Shermans in minutes, its gun flashing death while crews fled or burned. Tankers would whisper at night, voices low, about comrades who never made it out, their tanks reduced to smoldering hulks. The fear wasn't just the Tiger's power. It was the knowledge that it could be anywhere, waiting behind the next hill or hedgerow. Panthers, though more common with about 6,000 built, were nearly as terrifying. Their sloped 80mm frontal armor shrugged off the Sherman's 75mm rounds at anything beyond 500 yards, and their high-velocity 75mm KWK-42 could slice through a Sherman from a kilometer away. Unlike the lumbering Tiger, the Panther was agile, its wide tracks gripping terrain where Shermans bogged down. In the Battle of the Bulge, Panthers prowled through snow and fog, ambushing U.S. columns with deadly precision. One survivor from the 4th Armored Division recalled, "We saw a Panther's muzzle flash through the mist. Fired everything we had. Nothing. Then it hit us. Our lead tank brewed up and we scattered, hearts pounding. Even the Stu G3, a low-slung assault gun with a 75mm gun, was a nightmare in ambushes. Its squat profile made it hard to spot in Normandy's bocage or Italy's hills, and its gun could penetrate a Sherman's side armor at close range. Crews learned to dread the faint clank of tracks or the glint of a hidden barrel, knowing their tank was a target in a game stacked against them. This fear was amplified by the inexperience of replacement crews, a problem that grew worse as the war dragged on. By 1944, U.S. armored divisions were bleeding men, veterans killed, wounded, or burned out. Replacements arrived fresh from stateside training camps, often with just weeks of instruction on Shermans. They knew how to drive or load, but not how to survive. Spotting a Panther's muzzle flash through dust, or spotting a hidden Stug in a tree line, that took instincts honed by months in combat, instincts they didn't have. A veteran tanker from the 2nd Armored Division noted, "New guys didn't know the signs, a flicker of movement, a shadow that's too square. They'd roll right into a trap and die before learning." In Normandy, green crews often froze under fire, missing chances to flank or retreat. One incident near St. Lo saw a rookie platoon lose 3 tanks to a single Panzer IV because they didn't recognize its gun's range. The veterans who survived carried the weight of watching friends burn, their frustration mixed with dread as they trained yet another batch of kids who might not make it through their first week. The psychological strain wasn't just about facing superior tanks, it was the relentless grind of missions. Sherman crews were pushed into combat day after day, thanks to the U.S.'s industrial might churning out tanks and parts. A broken Sherman could be fixed or replaced overnight, but human endurance had limits. Sleep deprivation, the constant roar of engines, the stench of cordite and sweat in the turret, it wore men down. Tankers developed tics, obsessively checking hatches, scanning horizons even on brakes, or jumping at sudden noises. Some kept talismans, a rabbit's foot, a photo of a sweetheart, clutched during missions, as if luck could stop an 88mm shell. Others turned to gallows humor, joking about Ronson roulette, while knowing the next hit might be theirs. In letters home, censored to hide the worst, tankers hinted at the toll. "It's rough, Ma, but we keep going." But in private, they admitted the truth. Every mission felt like tempting fate. The environment didn't help. In Normandy's bocage, hedgerows turned every road into a kill zone. You'd inch forward, praying the next gap didn't hide a Panzerfaust or a towed 75mm gun. In the Hurtgen forest, dense trees and mud bogged Shermans down, while German anti-tank teams waited. One crew described a night patrol. "We heard tracks, didn't know if it was ours or theirs, sat there sweating, guns ready, till dawn showed it was a wrecked Panzer IV. Felt like we aged a year." In the Ardennes, the freezing cold of December 1944 added misery. Engines struggled to start, and crews shivered in unheated turrets, knowing a Tiger or Jagdpanther could be lurking in the fog. The Pacific was no better. On Saipan, jungle humidity rusted parts, and hidden Japanese guns waited in caves. On Okinawa, monsoon mud trapped tanks, leaving them vulnerable to suicide charges. Every theater had its own brand of terror, but the constant was the Sherman's vulnerability, a fact that gnawed at crews' minds. Post-war, the Sherman's legacy revealed its dual nature. Brilliantly practical, yet forever tied to the fear it inspired. France, inheriting both captured Panthers and U.S.-supplied Shermans, quickly retired the Panthers. Their complex engineering and constant breakdowns made them a logistical disaster, with final drives failing and parts impossible to source. Shermans, though, were keepers. Their standardized parts and rugged reliability let France upgrade them with new guns and engines, keeping them in service into the 1950s. Israel took it further, transforming Shermans into Super Shermans, with high-velocity 75mm or 105mm guns. These fought in the 1956 Suez Crisis and the 1967 Six-Day War, proving the tank's adaptability in desert warfare against Soviet-supplied T-55s. Chile ran Shermans until 2003, nearly 60 years after their 1942 debut, a testament to their enduring design. Other nations, from India to Yugoslavia, used Shermans in conflicts through the 1970s, their simplicity and availability outlasting flashier rivals. Subscribe if you liked the video. Subscribe if you like the stories alive. We're uncovering more untold tales to tell about the machines and men who shaped history.